members, Ms. Tracy German, and Mr. Andrei Tyushka, who are both connected remotely. As you know, Parliament fully supports Ukraine's peace formula. It stems from the United Nations Charter principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, but also includes global dimensions of food security, energy security, nuclear safety, environment, abduction of Ukrainian children. Currently, the Ukrainian peace formula is the only comprehensive framework for a just and sustainable peace in this war-torn country, and we encourage continued engagement of the international partners in this process. Parliament also called to work towards establishing an international coalition to implement the peace formula and to engage with Ukraine on the topic of future security guarantees, such as those proposed in the Kyiv Security Compact. Let me remind that it is Ukraine's legitimate right, in line with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, to defend itself against this Russian war of aggression so as to regain full control of the entire territory within the internationally recognized borders. Ukraine has also the full right to acquire legitimate means to defend itself and to seek security guarantees from other countries to achieve exactly that goal. Helping Ukraine defend itself doesn't equate to any direct involvement in Russia's war of aggression, but it is rather a way to restore and enforce international law. With all that in mind, let me now give the floor to our two speakers, and we begin with Ms. Tracy German, Professor of Conflict and Security at the Department of Defence Studies, King's College in London. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see my slides up here. So I'm Professor Tracy German from King's College London, one of the authors of the paper.
Hello, we've lost you.
Input forward.
Any technician available? And Ruskies, get out of the line.
Okay.
Hello, yes, we can hear you. We lost you. The line obviously collapsed. Back to you.
I got kicked out. Apologies. I don't know where I was, but anyway, I'm going to briefly present, along with Andrei Tyushka from the College of Europe, our paper that we looked at the various proposals that have been put forward to end the war in Ukraine, resolve the conflict, and facilitate enduring peace. So if we could move the slide on, please. Thank you. So I think it's important to remember that it's 2 years into the war, but also 10 years, over 10 years since Russia began its intervention. And we've seen increasing calls for a negotiated end to the fighting. And I think what our research emphasised was the dangers of peace at any cost, of pursuing a ceasefire and war termination without any unambiguous political settlement that's supported by acceptable and effective guarantors. So I think from our report, that is the headline finding. So the various proposals that we've seen put forward must be understood as well within this long-running kind of context, this over a decade of intervention and efforts to resolve the persistent conflict. You can see the key research questions on the screen that shaped our research. Essentially, we had two lines of inquiry: what needs to be done to bring the war to an end, and once that has been achieved, what are the critical next steps? So we looked at the literature on war termination, conflict resolution, peace building, and tried to identify obstacles to each against the various proposals, and then we sought to assess their feasibility. If we could have the next slide, please. Andrei will now talk you through the 10-point peace plan that was put forward by Ukraine. I'm hoping Andrei's there.
Yeah, good morning. I hope you can hear me well. There was some delay and technical glitching in passing the mic. I hope now you can hear me well, and I'm very glad to be here today and present our co-authored study with Professor Tracy German. Let me first and foremost perhaps say that it would be the right way, in my opinion, to start off presenting Ukraine's peace formula by stating the obvious. And that is that, like no other nation, Ukraine is genuinely interested in peace, but not one that will not last, and not one that will not make the aggressor country pay for its severe breach of international law and lives in Ukraine. It has also to be stated now that the international calls for and proposals of sorts for peace in Ukraine, as many of those are labeled, have multiplied since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, with some European, but mostly non-Western countries sporadically emphasizing the urgency of ceasefire, as well as peace negotiations, sometimes at the expense of Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity, or international justice as such. Kyiv's determination not to conclude or not to concede, basically, to the key principles has prompted some of the international leaders, as well as the Kremlin itself, to accuse Ukraine of not being actually peace-minded and having interest in protracting the war instead. In his address at the UN General Assembly in September 2022, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky underlined that Ukraine is interested in peace, not on Russia's terms, of course, or just any kind of peace, but rather just and lasting peace. And I think this is an understanding as well in both policymaking world and academia alike, that peace that needs to basically ensue after the end of this war definitely needs to be lasting and a just one to sustain the effort of ensuring Ukraine's security as well as building a lasting regional order. Back in September 2022, Ukraine's president outlined 5 key elements that have become known as the Ukraine's peace formula. I have to tell you, however, that as you will see on this table, the notion is much broader and multi-layered than the 5-point peace formula outlined in the very early days of Ukrainian peace activism. This was, of course, the first in a series of steps and initiatives undertaken by Ukraine on its path to peace. However, the Ukraine peace formula, as it appears nowadays, and you can perfectly see as well this broader picture, consists basically of a concise set of both strategic ideas that set the framework for ending the Russian aggression against Ukraine, as well as a more nuanced operational plan, something that has become known as the 10-point peace plan, as well as a number of implementing initiatives. And these include as well preparatory meetings on the way to a global peace summit, the so-called Path to Peace summits, that were so far held in 4 countries and cities, first starting in Copenhagen, then Jeddah, Malta, and most recently in Davos. Regarding that, one has to emphasize that the attendance of these preparatory meetings has considerably increased from 15 countries attending the first meeting in Copenhagen to 81 participating countries and international organizations in the most recent meeting in Davos. Remarkably, this format also includes countries from the global south, as well as at some of the meetings countries from the Russian near circle in a way. And here I refer to Armenia, an ally of Russia. Again, the crown of the Ukrainian peace formula is the Global Peace Summit itself, which is an evolving idea. And for now, it's known that it will consist of 2, at least, undertakings. The first one, which will gather all of the attendance so far, And the second one, which provisionally, the second or the last one, because we don't know yet how many of those global peace summits will be or will have to be, the last one including as well the aggressor country. As you will see, the first component of Ukraine's peace formula is basically that five-element peace formula itself, which is a strategic framework for first punishing the aggression and restoring Ukraine's territorial security, territorial integrity and security, as well as ensuring peace and security after the war, while preserving Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The fourth element, remarkably, of this five-element peace formula has a direct link to the earlier communicated as well Kyiv Security Compact, and calls for security guarantees for Ukraine as a precondition to establish lasting or sustainable peace. Notably, the fifth element, that is determination to defend itself, too relates to the Kyiv Security Compact imperative that Ukraine must be helped to considerably and credibly boost its defense capabilities to both sustain its current defense effort in the current war with Russia, as well as to deter Russian possible future aggression. Next on, you will also see that in November 2022, Ukraine presented a more detailed peace plan, which is known as a 10-step path to peace or 10-point peace plan, and was presented at the G20 meeting in Bali, Indonesia. The plan deals with both the short-term conditions of war termination, as well as the longer-term issues of reconciliation and ending the desire for war on the Russian part. Among the preconditions for peace, which I will not list all of them right now, the 10-point peace plan mentions, importantly, unconditional and non-negotiable restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, as well as the restoration of the international rules-based order, in accordance with the UN Charter that Russia blatantly violated. It also foresees the withdrawal of all Russian troops and the cessation of hostilities with the subsequent restoration of Ukraine's 1991 state borders with Russia. These are important elements as they also shape, in a way, the negotiating environment for whatsoever negotiations will be coming at the next stage of this war development. Last but not least, justice, including the establishment of a special tribunal to prosecute Russia's crime of aggression and other war crimes committed in the war's course, and a special international mechanism for Russian war reparations to Ukraine is also foreseen as part of that plan. Next slide, please. If you are to very quickly assess the nature, the scope, and the potential effect of Ukraine's peace formula, as just discussed, we need to keep in mind that this is a very complex diplomatic undertaking with elements of both Ukraine's national determination to defend itself and win against a bigger adversary, as well as international pressure and legal coercion, or the so-called lawfare. It seeks to basically set the conditions for the cessation of hostilities and ending of the war. However, as Professor German also noticed, that the risks of a false peace are very high and fraught with severe consequences if Ukraine and its partners do not basically ensure that there are safety walls against renewed escalation of Russia in case of a prolonged war, or indeed a revanchist aggression at some point later in time. There is obviously little trust that Moscow will stick to any ceasefire or war termination agreement as of now, based on its behavior since 1991, not only in Ukraine's context, but also widely regionally so, which demonstrates basically the commitment credibility issue here. As war termination involves more than one party, and in spite of Ukraine's wish or the genuine desire for peace, the absence of Ukraine's absolute victory and thus Russia's coercion into peace is a necessary precondition for any settlement to take place. Last but not least, the 10-point peace plan also alludes to the need to prevent escalation, and this is important, in particular through the so-called security guarantees, and to formally confirm the end of the war with an international agreement between the parties and guarantor countries as well. This is something in the making as well, and we will cover it in a bit. But I would want to emphasize just at this moment that in this way, both the functional logic and the strategic links are created between war ending on one hand, as well as war to peace and post-war security guarantees or settlements on the other hand. All in all, this is a very ambitious, but also cautiously unprecedented and experimental and evolving diplomatic undertaking, which is largely bound by the idea of Ukraine's victory, however defined, and the restoration of order. And I will hand over now to Professor German to cover alternative plans and ask for the next slide, please.
Thank you, Andrei. So very briefly, what's up on the slide here are the key points from the three other proposals that we examined: China's, the Pan-African one, and the proposal put forward by Indonesia's defence minister. Most briefly, I'll focus on the Chinese proposal. They set out their 12-point proposal last February for a political settlement, and I think it's important to examine this one because China sought to present itself as a neutral mediator in this war, and I think its position has been kind of characterised as one of pro-Russian neutrality, so it's neither condemned nor explicitly backed Moscow. Nearly half of its 12-point proposal, so 5 points in this proposal, focused on measures to moderate conduct during the war. So this was less about ending the war, but about moderating conduct during the war, so protecting civilians, etc. Very little attention in the Chinese proposal given to building sustainable peace or addressing the underlying causes of the war, so very little focus on the underlying kind of resolution of conflict, which is a vital component of building a sustainable peace. Another key aspect of this proposal, the Chinese one, is it makes no mention of the withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine or the return of Ukrainian territory. And I think those are two fundamental aspects as well when we look at what Ukraine is asking for. I think when we look at the Chinese proposal, there are some big challenges and some big problems with the proposal. It also makes no mention of security guarantees for Ukraine. But the fact, I think, the biggest stumbling block to its efforts are the fact that it is not considered as a neutral or disinterested party to this conflict. And I think its support for Russia and its talk of friendship without limits just prior to Russia's invasions means that there's an absence of trust, I would suggest, in terms of its ability to act as a neutral in this. Very briefly, the African 10-point peace proposal. This did talk about territorial sovereignty, de-escalation and security guarantees, but it doesn't specifically refer to security guarantees for Ukraine. It instead talks about security guarantees for all countries in the world, which I think is problematic. It does make reference to the importance of post-war reconstruction, which is very important, and I get that differentiates it from the China one. And then finally, the Indonesian proposal put forward by Defence Minister in June last year. This focuses more on war termination, a ceasefire, the creation of a demilitarised zone, UN-mandated peacekeeping forces. But like China's peace plan, it does not name Russia as the aggressor in this war, and it also refers to disputed territories. It talks about freezing the war, and I think that is problematic because it doesn't look for any kind of sustainable peace. It's not resolving a conflict, it's just freezing the status quo, which opens the door for instability and conflict and war in future. So there are some big problems with all three of these various proposals that have been put forward. And I'm going to hand back to Andre now to look at some of the other issues here. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. And unlike other alternative proposals that are more of one-off events, Ukraine's peace formula and the 10-point peace plan have actually a continued and sustained effort to display here, the diplomatic one. And we already talked about some links that are made in the peace formula and the 10-point peace plan to the post-war security guarantees. And these are basically mostly encapsulated in the work that is ongoing under the big kind of headline topic of Kyiv Security Compact. As you might all well be aware, in late 2022, Ukraine also set out its vision and wishes and the ways to guarantee security, actually, while transitioning from the war's end to peace building, and including its strategic objectives for accessing or acceding to NATO, all happening under the so-called framework of the Kyiv Security Compact. At NATO's 2023 Vilnius summit, the group of 7 states actually adopted a joint declaration of support of Ukraine, which in part drew on the Kyiv Security Compact and echoed quite some of its propositions. Now, as for the design, we have to basically consider the Kyiv Security Compact for what it is, and it is essentially a victory-bound contingency planning. It seeks to help Ukraine advance its victory plans more quickly and more effectively, and ensure as well its security both before and after the war is won. The Kyiv Security Compact is therefore driven by the trauma as well of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum and the so-called security commitments / guarantees, for the discourse varied, that were given to Ukraine back in time, including by the country that is now committing an act of aggression against Ukraine, that is Russia. And given this trauma, obviously the Kyiv Security Compact's tone is that any future security guarantees should be framed in a more legal way, stipulating more detailed conditions on what happens if Ukraine becomes a subject of renewed aggression from Russia, and how the guarantor states would help in such a condition in particular. So Ukraine's leadership, being driven by that trauma of 1994 Budapest Memorandum, as well as the atrocities of the current Russian aggression, seeks credible security guarantees, including legally binding commitments of guarantor states. Such security commitments, even if domestically they are framed in Ukrainian public and political discourse as security guarantees, have been enshrined by now in 7 bilateral security compacts, formally framed as security cooperation agreements, concluded with so far 5 out of 7 states of the G7 group, in particular the UK, Germany, France, Canada, and Italy. All of them concluded between the January and February period this year, as well as 2 non-G7 countries, that is Denmark and Netherlands. These agreements have been concluded in February and March this year, respectively. One more agreement is already in the making, as Estonia declared on the 8th of March its wish to as well conclude one with Ukraine. And just as Ukraine's peace formula itself, the Kyiv Security Compact and security cooperation agreements that draw on it, along with the G7 security guarantees of last year, is a moving target, and it's an instrument under development. Back when the study was produced, that we co-authored with Professor German, that is to say in early autumn 2023, none of the current 7 security compacts were yet concluded. Still, we are happy to also include those into our today's discussion, for it's important, and not least as they also help us understand the nature, the scope, and the mechanisms better, and thus to evaluate as well the potential effects better of yet another unprecedented undertaking, this time bound to ensure that the risks of Russia's renewed aggression after this war ends are possibly most minimal. And I would ask for the next slide, please. Generally, to characterize those 7 agreements already concluded, we have to face the obvious, and which is basically that they share a lot in common. There is a number of commonalities or common features, including, first and foremost, their shared origin and rationale, that is the Kyiv Security Compact and the G7 security guarantees of July 2023. Their emphasis as well on boosting Ukraine's capacity to defend itself now and in the future. Their financial
Sorry, we've lost you again. Hello?
I'm here. I don't know where Andre is.
Professor German, please continue.
Shall we carry on? If we could go to the next slide, please, because I'm well aware we're really running over time here. So very briefly then, if we look at how wars, do and don't end, and I think this really was what was underpinning all of our research here, that wars rarely end well. And that actually, if you look at the literature and you look at the history, wars that end with an outright victory or defeat, where kind of a durable peace is maintained, is very, very uncommon. Much more common are partial victories, wars that kind of just are protracted and then peter out, re-emerge sporadically, or wars that kind of end after very long processes of negotiation. These are far more common, and I think this is problematic here. One of the fundamental aspects that you need for both wars to end and then a sustainable peace are the foundations of security, good governance, and order within the country where war or hostilities have been taking place, because without those 3 pillars, it's very easy to lose what was won in terms of the battlefield and subsequent negotiations. And I think our research found that, if you're looking at wars since the beginning of the 21st century, nearly half of the international wars since the end of the Second World War have been followed by renewed fighting, partly because of an absence, for example, of security, good governance and order. And you can see that on our slide, the pyramid with order at the very bottom, order within the country being absolutely vital to build a firm foundation for peace and what comes next. Another key obstacle is a lack of trust between the belligerents. And that, the issue of trust, I think, is fundamental both to ending a war, but also the subsequent peace-building efforts. Because if there is no trust between adversaries, it's very hard to kind of accept the need for negotiations and any agreements that come out of that. And I think that for us, when we were doing the research, is really fundamental in terms of moving forward with conflict resolution, peace negotiations in Ukraine. This lack of trust, the absence of trust was key. Andre, I see you're back. I was just going quickly through. We're well out of time. Yes.
Professor German, can I just come in here? We have about 15 or 10 minutes left. Could I ask you to conclude the presentation?
Yes. That's what I was
Andre,
about
if you want to exact, because perhaps members still have some questions.
Yeah. Andre, I'll hand over to you to conclude.
Right, and I will be very brief. Apologies for being forcibly disconnected for whatever reason, but what my co-author was just stating is that the general picture of how the wars were fought and ended in the past century is not that promising. And it is even more so complicated to basically gauge the potential effects of the Ukraine's peace formula or any other peace formula that is at hand currently, given the complex nature of this conflict, which is not a limited one, neither in scope nor in terms of the goals that it pursues, and especially that there is no limited scope issue that can be resolved. Effectively, this is a war of aggression where Russia hasn't come to minimize or revise its maximalist goals, that one being undoing Ukraine's statehood, identity, as well as turning Ukraine into a very much neutered state, which, as many of the developments in Russia, but also the recent reviews with the security kind of arrangements or peace plans that Russia was negotiating a few weeks into this full-scale war, just indicates that there is no bargaining space and no space for negotiations. As for the peace formula and the Kyiv Security Compact itself, including the now available 7 security cooperation agreements, one has to underline that these are also the moving targets, and it is therefore very challenging to assess their potential effectiveness. However, what can be said at the moment is that none of the preferred peace plans, including the ones by Ukraine or Ukraine-aligned multilateral initiatives, would sufficiently and fully provide for conclusive and sustainable settlements for all 4 interlocking dimensions of war termination and peace building, as seen on the next slide, please. At the same time, we have to admit that the alternative peace proposals advanced by China, Indonesia, and the African group of states, among others, fall even shorter of providing credible basis for conflict resolution and peace building. And furthermore, their intentionality and implementability as such raise legitimate questions. Not to mention the way they frame the conflict itself, without naming Russia as the aggressor state, but also calling the whole war with huge number of losses of life, infrastructure, and all that, a situation in Ukraine or Ukrainian crisis, which is definitely not conducive towards bringing the parties to the negotiating table, if at all. I would perhaps stop here and hand over to Tracy for a very quick tour of recommendations, and happy to answer the questions that you might have in the Q&A session. No? Okay. Then we will end at this moment.
Thanks to both of you. And now, colleagues, since we only have a few minutes left, I would like to ask colleagues, would you like to take the floor? It's Michael Gahler first.
Very briefly, and thank you for the study here. And it's good that we have, so to say, a deeper insight in Ukraine's peace plan and the other ones. And I fully share, of course, your assessment. And, well, the decisive point is that I think, if I'm not mistaken, Russia has already officially rejected the Ukraine 10-point peace plan and not positioned itself finally on the other ones. And I think, as we don't know how this dreadful war will end, what is on our side to be made very clear, if there is any solution or something temporary or something painful for Ukraine, we are obliged, I would say, politically, to make it very clear that if Ukraine makes painful concessions, the rest of Ukraine that stays free and independent must be protected by not only security guarantees that provide some weapons deliveries, but they must either be the membership in NATO, or it must be something that amounts to it with bilateral obligations from member states who would say an attack on Ukraine is an attack on us. And otherwise, I don't see also from the Ukrainian side any alternative to agree to anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, who else would like to take the floor? Anyone else on my list? That is not the case. Then to conclude, I give the floor back to, I guess, Professor German first.
I was going to actually let Andre answer that one first. I guess my point and my response to that would be, this notion of war termination and then, peace building involving two parties. And, there are two different actors involved here. Andre?
All right. I hope you can hear me. And thank you very much for the question and the comment as well. Two in one, Mr. Gala. It's a difficult question as well, and as much as I would love to see the end of suffering in Ukraine, the human suffering as well as the suffering of the state and statehood as such, I might not necessarily agree that any temporary solution will be viable. For we also need to take into account the nature of this war, and this war is not for any piece of territory that will satisfy Russian appetites, if you wish, and also having observed a bit the domestic discussion in Russia currently, and the remarks made by the deputy head of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, as well as the de facto leader of Russia or the Kremlin after this elections of Putin, in a way, last Sunday, both stating that what they need and what they pursue in Ukraine is basically the takeover of the entire country, or basically neutralizing of the entire country. I'm not so sure that any negotiated settlement with regard to what you say, the rest of the country being left in peace and being guaranteed in terms of security and survival effectively will be observed by the Russian part. We also have to keep it in mind that this war has become deeply ingrained in Russian society and economy as well. Two developments that are difficult to unwind, and any temporary freezing of the conflict might be in anyone's interest but Ukraine's. It might well help stabilize the international situation. It might well help Russia to reassess, reassert, and rearm for the next wave of aggression that, as the literature says, as well as our hunches or guts are telling us, will definitely be the case. After all, this is a lasting war since 2014, and if one considers previous incidents and previous attempts of Russia to infringe upon Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, there were a few incidents even beforehand. It is just incompatible with the Russian logic of action. It's way broader ambitions than the currently occupied, temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine are, as well as its identity as a nation and as a great power as such. So I would rather be not positively, I would rather not have a positive attitude towards whatsoever temporary solutions, for this might prove to be even more detrimental for both Ukraine's domestic stability and peace, as well as regionally so.
To leave no doubt, I totally agree with you.
Thank you very much.
Professor German, you want to add something?
No, I'm fine. I'm sorry. I'm having real problems. I keep coming in and out. The sound.
Okay, then let me ask once again, colleagues, would anyone else like to take the floor? If that is not the case, then I would like to thank the authors of this study. We will reflect on the conclusions of your analysis and use them in our future parliamentary work on these important issues. One thing is clear, only a just peace negotiated on the terms decided by Ukraine can ensure a sustainable and long-lasting settlement of this dreadful war. Russia has a long track record of freezing conflicts in its neighboring countries, and therefore, while its armed forces still occupy parts of Ukraine, it calls to negotiate raise serious doubts. It is for Ukraine to decide if, when, and on what to negotiate. No negotiations can be held with Russia while it is explicitly maintains its goal to undermine Ukraine's statehood and independence. So, thank you once again. And colleagues, with that having said, I can now conclude our meeting for this morning, and we will continue this afternoon. And we have coordinators meeting in the afternoon, and then further items which will be chaired by Ulma Spite. Thank you.